All right,
Yeah.
welcome back to the shop.
It's good to be back.
It's very good to be back.
Yes.
We did our first documentary 2 episodes ago. I think we can say this is our first war movie.
So, yeah.
And it's interesting, before we kind of get into it, because we had this conversation last week where I think we were talking about Black Hawk Down and what my friend had said, where it comes out and it's supposed to be this, war is hell, anti-war statement, but at the same time, it's an action movie.
Right.
And I think what's interesting about this is, first, so the movie that we're doing is Hell is for Heroes,
Right.
directed by Don Siegel. His first?
I
First
don't
major?
think so. First major film.
Okay.
He had done some film noirs, I think, before this.
Okay.
And sort of cut his teeth. And he's also just been in Hollywood since the 40s.
Right.
I mean, as a cinematographer, special effects, all kinds of stuff I was looking up.
You know what is interesting? So I'm watching it, and I couldn't remember if I had seen it before, because with my dad, I'd watched so many war movies.
Yeah.
Every kind of war picture that was made at this time, pretty much. I can't even remember if I've seen or not. But it felt like it was the first time that I was watching it, and there are moments in this where I'm like, well, if Robert Donat, or if whoever wrote Saving Private Ryan, if he wasn't watching it or stealing from it, I'd be very surprised, because there's moments in it where I'm like, hey, that's Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah, and it's the way it's done.
Yeah.
The way things happen.
Yeah. But it was really interesting to just kind of sit down and watch this, because at the same time that it is a bare bones, meat and potatoes, no fat action movie, he slips in some things that weren't being mentioned.
It's got the flamethrower scorching the Nazi scene that I'm sure Tarantino took for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Right.
I'm almost positive.
Right.
I mean, nothing really comes to mind. It's literally looks the same,
Right.
other than it being black and white.
Right.
Because I think they weren't allowed to do that in color at the time. But we talked about Don Siegel real quick. I mean, he shot, in addition to the number of classics that he directed, like Landmark, like Dirty Harry, just iconic movies, right?
Yep.
He shot The Adventure of Mark Twain. He did montages for The Roaring Twenties, They Drive by Night, Meet John Doe, Now Voyager, Casablanca, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Across the Pacific, and Action in the North Atlantic, and then was a second unit director on Sergeant York, To Have and Have Not, assistant director on To Have and Have Not, and then second unit director on All the King's Men. I
wonder where he learned how to be.
Talk about just being around good movies,
Right.
and contributing to the completion of classics. So I think just being part of the anatomy of these great works, just you can't help but take away this knowledge.
You can feel him being like a sponge, like, okay,
Right.
I'm going to get as much out of this as I can. And that's what kind of, you think about, okay, this wasn't his first movie, but his kind of first major movie.
Right.
He's taking over for someone else, because Steve McQueen is a bit of a diva.
Yeah. I mean, just reading that McQueen's attitude in the film was most likely real.
Yeah.
Like, that was him not wanting to be there.
Right.
But man, it works.
Yeah.
As soon as he shows up in the movie, you're like, wow, he is just the presence,
Right.
man. It's there.
And it's one of those things where it's I say this whenever I happen upon The Blob, because that was one of Steve McQueen's first movies, where he almost doesn't have to be that good in The Blob, but he is. Like, you watch it and you're like, you get so wrapped up in this stupid movie about a thing of jelly that's eating people. And same thing with like this. It's like you feel like it probably was written and produced to be just another kind of patriotic war movie of the time, but you feel how much he is embodying that level of the soldier that's there, that is disenfranchised, that is so sick of everything, and being war wrought and just against it all without being vocal.
It's similar to Stalag 17.
Yeah.
Because the character arc, there's one character that is separate from this the camaraderie of this ensemble. Right? And that character ends up being the one that sacrifices everything. Right? So it's very similar in that regard. And the ending, it is moving.
Yeah.
It is special. It is... And I mean, they really didn't, like, they had to kind of like, I was reading, it's like they really had to kind of throw this together, man. There's like, God, where, the film's abrupt ending is due to Paramount shortening the production for financial reasons. McQueen couldn't cry on camera, so Siegel slapped him hard and then ended up blowing onion juice onto his face. That didn't work. He finally used eye drops.
Yep.
James Coburn and others were working on other projects, and they would just show up in the nick of time and do their lines with no makeup and little to no rehearsal. They're shooting scenes at night because of the summer heat. I mean, it's like McQueen and Siegel constantly bickering.
Yep. And so introducing Bob Newhart, which, you know, as a comedy fan and just a fan of his in general, it was really cool to see that him included, and just reading the backstory about how, you know, he was doing stand-up gigs, and he was really he was getting big, and he's like just kill me, just kill me off, and I can go do my stuff. But no, like he wanted that. There's something about his character that is as gritty and raw as the movie is. He kind of adds a level of not just levity, but just wholesomeness and just good-naturedness to the whole proceedings.
The humor is incorporated very well into it, and they don't feel like bits, even though they're classically timed, like Hollywood comedy. When he is in the bunker and he has to pretend to be relaying the message, when he says, "I've had to show Road to Morocco now 5 evenings in a row. Well, the men are beginning to get a little surly. They know all the lines." I mean, it's great, man. A little Bob Hope. Not, you know what I mean? It's like, and then the very beginning, when, and Bobby Darin, man. Great performance by Bobby Darin. When he says, first off, a very early line in the film I just love. When you got kids, you got to write something special to each one, or else they feel left out. I mean, there's something great about that.
Yeah, there's
line,
a level of details of that writing that
very personal.
Right.
And then, you still charging $5 a fountain pen? No, sir, they're $7.50 now. Oh, they're $7.50 now. Well, $8.50 with ink. I need a volunteer for detail. Oh, I forgot. For you, they're only $5. He's like, "You'll like that purple ink. It's very passionate." I mean, it's just. Oh, and then this pen broke down between yours and Truly. I mean, just great, superb writing.
Well, you know, that was another kind of callback, or, you know, something that jumped out at me that was like, wow, that's Saving Private Ryan, because Bob Newhart's character is like Upham, and
which
that's
which actor?
The guy that was in Lost as Daniel Faraday.
Oh, Jeremy Davies.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like even his whole introduction, where he's kind of bumbling and he's like, you know, you can tell that he's just a fish out of water. Same thing with Jeremy Davies in Saving Private Ryan. Like, he drops his helmet, he's doing all this stuff.
And as much as they're annoyed by him, they end up actually being pretty protective of him, right? Because they just don't want him to die.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's like actually can date back to War and Peace. I mean, there's a character in that novel that is an aristocrat who goes and it's like, and he wants to fight, and they're just like, what are you doing here, man? Get out of here. And he's just so inept. But then they end up being like, they don't want him to die.
Right.
And I mean, you could see that's a very realistic scenario.
Yeah. And I admire Don Siegel as a shooter so much because just the whole, again, that kind of meat and potatoes way of filmmaking where, I don't want any unnecessary scenes. And it's just,
I mean, it's a lean film.
It's very lean.
Yes.
And it's just like, here's the setup, here's our introduction to the characters that we need to know, and then here's their situation, and then we just, then it's just
the shot,
set piece.
The POV shot from the Nazis' perspective when McQueen is stabbing his face is pretty ahead of its time, man.
Yeah.
If you think about this as early 60s, you see Coburn scorching a Nazi with a flamethrower, you see a face being stabbed. Basically, you're getting stabbed based on the angle. And then, man, the way he moved the camera when McQueen goes to that bar.
Yeah.
And as soon as McQueen goes behind the bar, the camera follows his movement while he goes. I mean, I just love when the camera is moving with the actor in a way that you just feel it. I mean, it's just, he finds ways to use that type of camera movement and elevate certain parts that doesn't make it just feel like a handheld camera moving around.
And yet it doesn't feel like a showing off of the director,
No.
right?
He does it when he needs to, basically. Yeah.
And that scene between McQueen and the bartender, the woman, it's just a great scene.
Oh, it's a great scene.
And you, again, just a really simple, quick way to set up his character. How alert he is, and and then just how cold and dead he is, and he's just, it's just, I'm going to do what I got to do to serve myself and make it out of here alive. And you just feel his inner anguish and his tormenting, like you just see it on his face. And I don't know, I mean, as much of a pain in the butt that he probably was, there's something to be said about.
Listen, we've talked about this with Brando,
right.
Where I don't know if I would quite put McQueen on Brando's level, but who is. But McQueen was certainly one of the best actors of his generation, and he does bring a level of realism. And I think he couldn't help but be real.
Yeah.
I think there was something about him that was almost like James Dean, where it's like they get on a set and it's like, man, they just have it.
Right.
And
co-stars or director be damned. Like I'm not changing it for anything.
There's all these little details in the film that I love, like that you notice, like when they enter the cathedral, all the religious soldiers take off their helmets before they enter, and the other ones don't. So you can see who. I just thought that was a very cool detail to think about as a director, to not just take it for granted. All right, now go into the cathedral. Well, no, wait. The religious soldiers would take off their helmets. I mean, that is an extra level of detail in a film like this that I think deserves attention.
And you wonder if that's something if that was written like that,
right.
Or if
it could have come
happened,
from anywhere.
If it happened,
it could have
on
been
the
an
time.
actor that's like, wait a minute, like,
yeah,
I fought.
Right.
They're like, like.
Why are some people taking off their helmets when they
Right.
walk in there and some aren't?
Right.
Oh, that's interesting. Let's do that.
I mean, I just think it's great.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things that makes it feel more real than it would.
And the one other thing about McQueen is I really like that he's not the it would have been so easy for him to be, I'm the good-looking star.
Right.
You're not going to put mud in my face. You're not going to.
I mean, almost like a William Shatner approach. Like,
Right.
not to knock Shatner. I have
Right, but
respect
I mean-
for what he was. But there is a
My hair needs to look perfect, my
I'm
skin-
Captain Kirk.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I don't think McQueen had that
No.
air about him.
He has a similar thing to like how I think of as like Brad Pitt. Like Brad Pitt could have easily cashed in on his good looks and his charming personality
Yep.
to just do that. But no, he takes He takes hard-edged roles.
Yeah.
He doesn't care what he has no vanity about it. I feel the same way about this with McQueen. Like, you know, you feel like any other actor of his stature, especially at this time when he's, you know, he's got to care about that type of thing, would be like, okay, well, you know, why am I doing this right now? Can I have a little bit of humanity here? And then do I have to die at the end? And I agree. There's something about, it's kind of a cliche, right? At that time, and perhaps even now, of the guy sacrificing his life for the good of everyone else. But something about this doesn't feel that way.
Well, and you can sort of see that he has this sort of like existential air about him, of like, where he's sort of like in this weird, this place between being completely numb and being so just worn down to the point of just like, I mean, the way he talks to that Polish dude of being like, if you show up, I am going to, whatever he said, like, I'm going to put a bullet in your head.
Right.
Like, man, those scenes are like, whoa, man.
Yeah.
Like, you feel it.
Yeah. And just when, you know, the CO is talking to him and he's like, if it's like, if you point your finger at me one more time, I'm going to. And you feel it, like it's
and
like
that scene was well, maybe it was a little bit forced, of like, see how you can just try to do the right thing, but the hierarchy of the military is like any other hierarchy, and there's going to be people that are like, you know what, you didn't do it by the book, so you're getting
right.
So this is happening to you, and it's like, but hell is for hero. Like, it makes you think about the title. It's like, well, when you're in hell, the rules don't apply. Okay? And had you seen this before?
That's the thing, I couldn't remember, because I have seen so many war movies just from not just
from growing up. That's what you were saying, is that you might have.
You know, it may have been on. I may have seen parts of it, but no, watching it for this, it felt like the first time I'd seen it.
This was one that I only have seen because of my list. I mean, I just, you know, Hell in the Pacific is another one that I can't wait to do an episode on.
Yep.
Are you familiar with that one?
No.
John Borman flick with Lee Marvin and Toshiro Mifune.
Okay.
And they're on an island and opposite sides.
Like Enemy
And
Mine.
they're just, yes.
Wow.
And that's probably where they got the idea. But I remember watching all these movies that had hell in the title, and there were just some real gems. And this was one where I was just like, it's so bare boned. And
well, in terms of like other directors, kind of looking back, especially like someone like Spielberg, he always, maybe he even mentioned this one, but I remember Battleground is a movie that gets mentioned.
Yeah, I never watched that, and there was always one that I saw the box too. But
what's the one by Wellman that you wanted to?
Heroes for Sale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've always, you know, it's been a title that I've kind of known about. I just don't know if I'd seen it before. But I enjoyed watching it this time just for that level of bare bones filmmaking that I kind of miss. And then one thing I gotta say, you know, I'm sorry, spoilers, but the choreography and way that he shoots Steve McQueen and his death, it's, I had to rewind it and watch it again, because I'm like, how, like, there's something about, I don't know if if I don't know if it's two cuts that he married together seamlessly, or if he sped up the film at just a section of it, because it really, like, you feel the impact of that bullet that hits him, and then somehow about like, how did he fall the way he fell so perfectly and not get injured?
Well, and how intense is the crawling? And then planting the knife. And then it's almost like planting the idea that one of these times, someone's not gonna, like, it's not gonna work. You know, you sort of know what's coming. but it's still effective.
Right.
And I always love when a filmmaker can pull that off.
Just good set pieces. The whole, like them going through the mine field is just, it's just a great executed set piece of, the darkness, feeling that it almost felt like and maybe, it didn't feel like a World War II movie to me, in as much as it was, it felt like a Vietnam movie to me for some reason. It felt like something like Platoon. It actually also felt like something like I remember when The Hurt Locker came out, James Cameron said, because it was Catherine Bigelow, he said that I think you've made this generation's Platoon. And that's what it feels like. It feels like this movie is
that generation's version.
Yeah, of just a movie that is it's bare bones. It doesn't really try to say anything politically except to just show the gritty realism of war and not have it be such a gung-ho, propaganda-filled jingoistic fest. If you want to watch it that way, you can watch it that way, just like people watch Platoon that way. But you can also watch Platoon and feel like Jesus, like the horrors that they go through. And I feel like that was his, him Don Siegel taking over for the other director. I feel like that perhaps that other director was just wanted to do that. And Don Siegel said, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this right.
Well, and the other director actually was the writer. So Robert Perosh, not only was he was a master sergeant with the 35th Infantry in World War II, and he experienced a very similar situation with the rest of the troops being called off to go do, and then you have to secure this area, and you're just not really left with a suitable circumstance in which to do that. It originally was called Separation Hill, but they changed it because it was too similar to Pork Chop Hill. I'm always just interested in what movies were almost called.
Right.
But interestingly enough, I think obviously the reason that the movie contained such kind of effortless humor is Robert Perosh wrote two Marx Brothers movies, Night at the Opera and Day at the Races. He also wrote,
just the two best ones.
He also wrote I Married a Witch, which is awesome Renee Claire movie that has a lot of humor, but also wrote Battleground, Gathering of Eagles, and was a contributing writer to The Wizard of Oz. So, and so he was going to direct, because it's like, this is my story, I'm going to direct, and then he had so many problems with McQueen that it was like, screw this.
This isn't worth it.
I'm just going to,
I mean, it's hard. It's one of those things where it's hard hearing those types of stories because, you grow up and you watch the movies and you love the performances, but then you just read about.
Right. Well, because it's like the people that you idolize, you have this idea of what you think they were like, or like.
Right. Or just that, it's not even that I really idolized him. It's just like, oh, look at that. He's so cool,
Right.
And he makes it look effortless. And then you read those stories and it's like, oh no, he was a pain in the ass.
I mean, just reading about the book about High Noon and reading about Gary Cooper.
Yeah.
About what he was, how he grew up, and then what happened to him when he became a hot part of the Hollywood machine. It changes you. It gives you power, and it gives you a sense of your own
worth and entitlement.
And I imagine that's what just happens to a lot of these people. I wanted to mention the art director on this film. I'm obviously not going to read all these titles, but Hal Pereira, Ministry of Fear, Double Indemnity, Roman Holiday, Rear Window, Ace in the Hole, Detective Story, Sabrina, White Christmas, To Catch a Thief, Stalag 17, Shane. The list goes on and on.
Well, and this was it's a 100% backlot film, right? Which is crazy to think about because maybe there's a few scenes where you're like,
It doesn't
I can
feel
tell.
that
It doesn't.
way.
Yeah, it doesn't. It felt like they were on location
Yeah.
somewhere. Maybe not overseas, but at least somewhere.
Right. Like I've seen 70s movies where they do like a Vietnam flashback and it looks like it was shot in New Jersey. It's like, is that a bush?
Right.
Is that like a,
Right.
like, you know what I mean? That's not
Right.
the bush. That's just a bush.
Right.
Like, and, so it's like, it definitely didn't feel like they skimped
Yeah.
on location feeling real.
Right. And seeing as the art director handled that many different levels of productions,
Right.
certainly helped.
Right.
Wow.
I think that probably takes the pressure off a
Who
little
edited
bit.
it?
What's that?
Did you read anything about the editor?
Yeah, the editor, it was definitely well edited too. The editor hadn't, just the only other movies of note were The Black Orchid and Breakfast at Tiffany's. But still, I mean, I actually kind of liked the score as well. It had elements of that patriotic
The
kind of,
rat-a-tat-tat
but it
thing?
wasn't done in like they're going off to, like it
Right,
wasn't
right.
like that.
Right.
It definitely was, and it was jarring in places. It definitely provided a good atmosphere.
And then just like from the very beginning, the opening title sequences and the font that they use and the way that it just it hits, and it feels like it was a kind of a precursor to something like The Dirty Dozen or Where Eagles Dare, that type, that it teed up for those types of movies that would either take it in a more epic scale production or add even more zany humor to it.
I mean, a movie like Fury,
Yep.
I think of, just because it's that
Tight-knit.
tight-knit group and the
Yep.
Brad Pitt character.
I mean, it's interesting. It would be interesting to go back and watch a couple more of these because it's hard even by today's standards, kind of looking back on it, and like there's a section of those films that, well, they were made to inspire patriotism amongst America, to say, we're doing the right thing, right? Or stand behind in a way that I don't think you can't really do right now, right? I mean, everything seems political now. Clint Eastwood has a new movie out that is getting both sides of that.
I think it's like, if a filmmaker, whereas they might not necessarily be saying in an absolute sense that war is bad and war is evil, maybe they think it's, that it's a necessary evil, right? But at the same time, I think you can portray this sort of grim nature of what it feels like to be in war. It's much like I'm reading a bunch of James Jones books right now and can't wait to watch The Thin Red Line, because, I mean, for someone that fought, it's like, you have your own sort of feelings about being in the Army and being like a 20-year man and all that stuff, but it's like at the end of the day, it's the psychological ramifications of being in that.
Right.
And so I feel like this is a film where it's showing how how abnormal it is to be in these situations, but also to, and the fact that it doesn't feel like ultra patriotic, right? But just realist, right?
Right.
But then also to, celebrate the heroic nature of what these people go through, and that no matter what they're going through, there's that moment where, they're going to step up, or they're going to do what they have to do. And this isn't something that everyone has inside them to do. it takes, I mean, I guess maybe if you put yourself in that situation, you might discover that you have that.
Right.
But it takes a certain brand of, in any profession like that, whether it's like a cop or a firefighter or a soldier. It's like, man, I mean, and I felt like this movie in particular kind of nailed that.
Right. And remember when we were talking about The Master, how there's that great section of The Master where, these guys came back from World War II, they saw all this horrific stuff, and yet they didn't have an outlet or an understanding from everyone else back home about what they saw, how they're dealing with it, and what the effects are of it. So, it's like, go out and get a job. Go out and,
it's sort of similar to the NFL, where the NFL, it's like, this is what, it's such a time-honored institution, but they don't really realize until it's too late, like, all the effects it's having on people's lives when they're done. And they're not equipped. They hadn't set up the proper means to deal with that. And it's like, yeah.
I don't know. It would be interesting to go, because one of the films that I remember from my youth of seeing at this time that was watched over and over again was Sands of Iwo Jima, and that's a movie that that much has been written about, of like, it's the ultimate patriotic propaganda film.
Yes.
But I do still remember images and moments of that movie where it was also trying to do something else beyond that, which is, can we take a moment to see or show you what it is they actually did over there and what they actually saw. And I felt like that was kind of part and parcel of what the screenwriter and Don Siegel was trying to uphold. It was like, and that's probably why he decided that it had to be nuts and bolts. There's no time for big speeches or superfluous stuff.
There's nothing that really made it. It all felt like the flowing of reality.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like a Hollywood film, like the way it's composed. It really felt like one moment leading to the next.
Well, yeah, like almost like a
you're
high noon real time type.
Right, you're
of movie.
following them, and they're just doing whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
And probably a lot of that, it's probably a combination of the writer having actually experienced this thing, and also Don Siegel's approach to filmmaking. It seems to be the right combination.
And maybe that is what. Maybe that is what makes that final moment that much more powerful, because and maybe in those other movies, those earlier films, those propaganda style films, it was, this moment has been set up so that we can clearly see that the decision is being made to do it.
Right.
And then
which is like benignly manipulative,
right? And there's a few moments where he's like, yes, I'm doing the right thing, right. But with this, it's just like, boom, he's shot, boom, he's right there, he sees the thing.
You see him make the decision to do this,
right?
And it's done not in like a way, like you see him recognizing that he's going to be dead, right? There's a lot going on in that moment before he does it, man.
And then the stumbling, the walk, is he gonna? And that's even handheld too, right? They go into his point of view of stumbling towards the thing,
right?
And it's really just rapid fire, quick, and it hits you. That's why the titles are that, like, boom, boom, boom. It's like it sets up a. That's why I wanted to talk about the editor, is like it sets up this pace and really doesn't deter from that at all. It's just one thing after the other.
Not to say this editor wasn't a huge part of the composition of the film, but at the same time, looking at Don Siegel's montage list, I mean, I think he understands how to, not that he was an editor, but montage is still using the same components to assemble footage. And I think it's like learning from all those films. It's probably the best opportunity for this editor to be in, to be working with someone like that it's like makes your job that much easier, you know.
There was a because you mentioned the thing about Steve McQueen crying and not being able to cry and all that. That was a moment too that, you know, in Saving Private Ryan, he feels like he got his own, like it was his fault, and then he goes and he finds, you know, a spot where he can kind of be alone, and he has this like breakdown. But speaking of Spielberg, so Spielberg, when he was doing Close Encounters, he went to a lot of different actors, but he went to Steve McQueen to see if he wanted him to play Roy Neary. And he meets him at a bar. And,
wow, that would have been
right. And Steve McQueen says, you know, I love the script. I'd really want to be able to do it, but I have to say no because I can't cry on camera. And he's like, well, don't worry about that. And he's like, no. At the end of your script, you know, he's looking at his family and he cries, and it was a powerful moment. Like it almost made me cry.
Rather have an actor that can cry, be in that, yeah.
And he's like, no, it's like, all right, you know, we won't do that. Like, you know, you won't have to cry if you'll be in my movie.
Right.
And he's like, no, you can't. You can't cut that out. And that's, you know, it's one of those things where you're kind of like that you feel like that's something that's followed him around forever. And maybe because of that moment here, it's like, you know, if I can't do it for real, then I don't want to do it. And you had mentioned that you want to do a deep dive on Don Siegel. Mm-hmm. So do you have a list, or you see a thing?
Yeah, so he... So the ones I've seen are Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Coogan's Bluff, Dirty Harry, Charlie Varick, Escape from Alcatraz. Mm-hmm. I want to see The Big Steal, Riot in Cell Block 11, Private Hell 36, Crime in the Streets, Babyface Nelson, The Lineup, The Killers, which I can't believe I haven't seen, Madigan, The Beguiled, The Shootist.
The Beguiled's a weird movie, man.
Yeah.
Did you see the new one?
Mm-mm.
Oh. Yeah, it's a weird movie, man.
But he has even more that, like, these were just the ones that had a rating of like 7 or higher on IMDb, which is still a pretty impressive list. Right. But there's others that were probably still pretty good, but just were in the 6 range.
Well, that's right, because he made Invasion of the Body Snatchers before this, right? Because this is 62.
Right.
All right. So I don't know why I was thinking that it was his first. But Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I don't know if you've seen that lately, but that too.
I mean, I love the 70s version too.
Me too. But even that, like looking back on it, it has a very, again, that kind of bare bones, like, you know, it is tight and taut, and that's why it works so well. But
you know, what's interesting to me is that, like, so this is a movie that, I mean, is pretty obscure, right? It's like you don't necessarily hear it come up when people mention Steve McQueen. It's not really a title that gets thrown out very often. Yet Deep Space Nine, which I'm not necessarily a fan of, but they have a whole episode that uses a similar plot, and then they pay homage to it by having 4 different characters that are named after the characters in the movie. It's like, so it's just so random. Yeah. It's like, so someone, you know, the writer is like, I really loved that movie, Hell is for Heroes. So let's like find a way to, without even being showy about it, just like incorporate that into an episode.
Right.
I just think it's cool.
Sometimes I wonder, like that comes about because these writers of these shows are just so under the wire of having to come up with something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like,
Right.
what's a movie I like? Hell is for Heroes. Okay.
Right.
How can I do that?
Yeah, true. Yeah.
But it's cool, like,
Right.
To pick this movie.
Right.
And again, it's got to be because one, it's a simple story, but also so well executed and timed out that you could cut it down and just make it an hour-long episode, right? Just take different parts of it.
Right, and you just have, a crew of 6 people go to a planet. And then
it's space, not Europe.
Right, exactly. Couple just, one great line is the one character, I forget his name, but he says, "I got a system. Every time things turn bad, I concentrate on something from the past that was worse. You ought to try it." Like, just a great line, man.
Yeah.
And there's tons of those in this movie.
He'd probably hate me for saying this, but I think like Bobby Darin reminded me of how well Dean Martin is just naturally as an actor, and it must come from, being such a great performer.
Right. I mean, if you didn't know that this was one of the most famous singers of all time,
there's nothing
you would
about
think
it.
he was an actor.
Right.
And that's why I'm always impressed when you have a musician turned actor that is like that, because it's like, man, it's just a natural knack for being, genuine, right? I wanted to mention, there's just a superb use of silence during one sequence where, in a very patient filmmaking, where you just feel that he's not, for as economical and efficient as the film is, it doesn't feel rushed. And he takes the time to properly set up things so that when the payoff happens, you feel it. And then there's a brilliant cut to an aerial shot of them transporting the wounded soldier to a Jeep. It's like, it almost seems like out of place in this movie. It's this, all of a sudden, it's just this beautiful, and it doesn't feel like, I'm not a fan of arbitrary aerial shots. It's like, why did you do that? But with this, it's almost like God looking down on it, man. It's like, why would you go to an aerial shot there? Oh, because it looks cool when they're transporting to the wounded Jeep. No, this is definitely like an omniscient, looking down on these people while they're doing this. There's something about it that just affected me.
Right.
Yeah, it's one of those movies where, for all the things that went wrong with the making of it, to see that this is what gets left on the cutting room floor is really inspiring. And it's like, no matter how problematic an endeavor is, just have faith that you have the right people that are going to do the right things, that are going to be able to salvage it and produce something of worth,
Or just, how do you, it's not just another war movie, not to Don Siegel, not to this writer. It may feel that way to everyone who's making it. It's like, this is just another, B war movie.
It didn't feel that way to the actors giving the performances either. Hearing that those, a lot of, like Coburn and others, were doing all these other jobs and then coming in and just doing, to do what they did with no rehearsal is pretty impressive, and lets you know that they were still taking the time to really know their stuff, so that they could just show up and do it at the drop of a hat.
Right. But just the inspiration of, I'm not just making another war movie. Here's how it's different. Here's what I'm going to do to make it,
to set it apart.
Yeah.
From
how do I make it dynamic? How do I set it from every other one that's been made?
You're right, because it is more personal than some of the ones you see with like John Wayne and stuff where.
And you feel it. I mean, I was. That's why, like, I'm like, well, you picked it, so there's got to be something here. So when it first started, I'm like, okay, wow, it's really just a bare bones war picture.
Yeah.
But then as things went on, I'm like, wow, there's that moment, there's that moment, there's and it did. It stepped out at me and like was like, no, pay attention because this is not just the war movies that your dad.
I think of is Trying to Seize, because something like that where it easily could have been either just another slapstick comedy or an action film or an adventure film or any of the three.
Right.
And there are set pieces in that film that set it apart.
Yeah.
Where you're like, I can't believe what I just saw.
What the hell am I watching?
And there are a handful of those in this film.
Yeah.
That are just timeless set pieces. And it's in the nature of what we talk about in the show of being sort of blueprints for future films, where you can go back and see what did he do really well.
Right. And that's the thing, like the ripple effect of this film that probably doesn't even get called out or that it's known for.
But that filmmakers are aware of this.
Yeah.
Because they're aware of Don Siegel and they're aware of,
That's why, like, I know, Spielberg's the type of guy who would be like, okay, I'm going to watch my favorite war movies before I go off and do Saving Private Ryan.
Right. I mean, this definitely might have been one for him for that. I mean, it's not like Lonely or the Brave is a very well-known film.
Right.
And he has admitted to that being one for him. I mean, so.
Because it's a similar thing. It's like with Saving Private Ryan, I remember getting into an argument with someone about it, is like, well, it starts as an anti-war film, but then it ends as a pro John Wayne movie.
And I feel like the objective then should to not be looking for whether it's this or that. Right? It's like just let it be what it is and stop looking for sides, and that is where it does share the nature of this film.
Yeah. Because again, you can, if you want to watch it and you want to get the, war is exciting and it's, just one big action picture, you can certainly get it from this picture, but that's not all it's got going for it.
One of the takeaways for future filmmakers, I think, and screenwriters, should be the characters feel real.
Yeah.
So that is another thing that I think sets it apart from any other films from the era, of just these, you really can feel like the individual lives of these characters. And actually early on, I hadn't seen the film in, 15 years, right? So it's like when Bob Newhart shows up and then doesn't like a mortar shell almost like blow him up, like, and it felt like sort of slapsticky, and I was like, oh no, is this gonna like totally deviate? Because I didn't remember.
Right.
It's like, is this just gonna deviate tone, and all of a sudden this part's gonna be like this slapstick moment? But I think it's just Bob Newhart is effortlessly funny, right? So it's just like the way he is dealing with that moment is like, what, he just, I think it's the inherent humor of it is that he isn't a frontline guy, right? So he's not used to this. So when he doesn't realize that he's driving up onto this this combat, territory.
And that's the other thing too, is like the diversity of it, of saying like, not all soldiers are gruff and tough. You get those, but then you also get the Bob Newhart, because it was a draft, so it's not like so you get the Bob Newharts, or they probably shouldn't be here, but they're here and they're dealing with
jacket,
it.
Gomer Pyle.
Yeah. And that too is that detail of going into the church, and some take the helmets off, some don't. You know, it doesn't mean the same thing for every single soldier. Not every soldier is Catholic. So some do, some don't. And then again, that the detail of the writing, that knowing that the writer was there, he had to. It either came from him or he saw it.
And I think a similar situation that he dealt with was the when they basically trick the Nazis into thinking that they are more than they are,
right,
with the backfiring of the Jeep, and maybe not have been in that exact way, but the, you know, sort of like Argo, you know, it's like this use of creativity and ingenuity in order to deceive, and really it's survival. It's like you're searching the back of your brain for that thing that's going to keep you alive. It's a pretty powerful storytelling motif,
right,
you know.
Good stuff, man. Thanks for picking us.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely.
No, it was really good to see. It's always good to see early, any Steve McQueen, but early Steve McQueen. And it just, you know, it took me by surprise in all the right ways.
Cool.
And again, like that bare bones filmmaking that we don't get a lot of these days is always welcome.
Awesome. So next week is, or no, in
so
the next episode is going to be
Midnight Run,
which I cannot believe I've never seen.
The ever elusive Midnight Run.
Wait.
Yeah.
You've talked about this movie to me for a long time, and I've been aware of it since I was a kid. So can't wait.
It's going to be a fun one for me. But yeah, I think we'll, just by nature of the fact of what's coming up in the next 2 weeks, we'll probably have to take some kind of hiatus and then come back and finish up this season and then get right into the next one.
Cool.
All right.
Well, to everyone watching, happy holidays. Enjoy
holidays.
yourself, and we'll be back with another one. Yeah.